Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of, oh my God. I didn't mute myself or I didn't do not disturb myself right at the intro. Ugh. All right, do not disturb. There we go. I don't
Oh,
know
that's a
if you
good way
heard
to
that or
break the
not, but
tension.
oh man, it's been a day. It has been a day. Anyway, welcome to the Volpe Creates Show, the weekly talk show where we discuss video games and creative technology. I am your host, Chris Volpe, joined by Baby and Pumpkin today, but they're both like at my feet, and I don't know what they look like. They're both staring at each other about to start something, so we may hear animal noises. And Lucas, our intern, how are we doing today?
Howdy, howdy. I'm doing good. Hope y'all are doing great.
So this is your last month of being an intern.
Yes, it is. I am almost done, and I graduate here in 1 or 2 weekends. So I am
Yeah, and then we're
ready
gonna
to go.
we had a chat. Was it yesterday or the other day? We're gonna keep you around a little bit longer, see how things go. So you won't be an intern anymore.
That's true. That's true. I'm looking
You'll
forward to
be
it.
you'll be a something. I don't know what it'll be, but it won't be an intern. Um, and then of course every week I like to bring on a guest where we can chat about whatever we want to talk about. So this week's guest is a Mr. Henry Bawden, a professor at the Columbus State Community College, the founder owner of Bawden Studios, as well as one of my good friends. So Henry, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a nice Friday.
It is. Actually, I walked and I do my morning walk and I go get my coffee. And this morning it was looking like it was going to rain again, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get caught in the rain. But now it's looking pretty beautiful.
See, and I've lived a lot of places, and there's always the running joke of, if you don't like the weather, wait a few minutes, whatever else. Ohio's kind of an extreme version of that, where today it's nice, it'll be 80s Sunday, but Wednesday it was snowing, and the previous weekend it was in the 70s, and the week before that it was snowing, and it's weird here.
Yes, I was talking to my friend, Jake Donovan. Had him over
Mhm.
where we were playing some games, and we were chatting, and I was like, I've never been one of those people that's like, I hate winter and like I need to go live in Florida or something. But this year got pretty close when we had like our fourth winter, for like last week. It was like 5 days of like 30-degree, 20-degree weather again in
Yeah.
almost late April. I was like, come on.
And we'll be hitting 31 next Tuesday or Wednesday.
You be quiet. Is that true? Is that true words?
It
I haven't
is.
looked at.
Until they change
Better
it
not.
again, but then we're gonna
Yeah, well
jump
that's gonna
straight
be
into tornado season.
it's gonna be the lows though. The lows are gonna be in the low to mid 30s. At least we're gonna be like in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
I can tolerate not going out during the low period, but yeah, it is really annoying when I like want to go and walk or if baby needs to go out in the middle of the night to go potties. It's a thing at 3 a.m. when it's freezing
Yeah.
out. But anyway, so Henry, thanks for being on the show. I want to start just a little bit to kind of set the stage. So you and I know each other, and I think we've known each other for over a decade now.
Oh,
And
yeah, it goes way back.
yeah, and we met sort of tangentially within the COG group, the Central Ohio Game Dev Group, which is our local game community. And then I mean, pretty much ever since we first met, I think we kind of just got along and
Yeah, we
been
just
chatting and
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Alex set us up like, hey, there's this guy I know you need to meet. It's like, great, connect us. We connected, went out for lunch, and then had a bromance ever since. It was just like,
yeah.
and I think, part of it's just we're really close in age and had kind of similar background and life experiences and stuff. And yeah, it just kind of hit from there.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, like you said, we just had a connection, and then you started helping out with GDEX. You're wearing a GDEX shirt. I'm wearing last year's Origins GDEX shirt. You're wearing
Coming up in what,
you're wearing
5-6
classic.
weeks, something like that.
Oh Jesus, man. Oh man.
Probably longer than that, but not much.
Yeah, I didn't like we'll talk about GDEX
Oh yeah, we'll
for
get
sure
to it.
this show, but man, I like it is I want to say it's unbelievable, but it's really not. But man, COVID is still hanging over the event. It's
Yeah.
been 2.5 years or whatever now, and we're still discussing mask mandates, and we're still looking at, I try to be as open and transparent, but we're not at the ticket sales we want to be at yet.
Mhm.
We haven't hit the sort of exhibitors and speakers that we want to hit yet. Now, that being said, events are always weird. Like, we sell like
Yeah.
80% of our tickets in like the
It's
last 10 days before the show. So there's
yeah.
sometimes where it like the lead up is like, oh my God, we're not selling anything. And then like that Saturday we'll sell like 40% of our tickets or something, you know?
I was gonna say you've even gotten vendors, and you got a couple of sponsors like last day or day of at a couple
Oh,
of those. Yeah, I was gonna
I
say you had one for the kickoff event that like signed up that morning.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, we've had our I don't know how this show keeps running. Like every year, it keeps happening. It keeps. I think it gets better every year. People really. I think last year, despite the COVID weirdness, had a lot of really exciting stuff. And I
Oh
think
yeah,
2019 before COVID hit was like. I mean, that might have been the best year we ever had, just
yeah.
in terms of excitement and the quality of the games that we had, and just all sorts of fun events. Really good
That
stuff.
was a really good one. And then the one that sticks out to me, as much as I'm loving the growth, there's also something amazing about the early shows, like the
Hmm.
Grant Kirkhope show,
I was going to say
because
that's probably
that because that one's so memorable because it wasn't just, hey, we got this speaker and they're pretty cool. It was like that whole show was around that. Like even the whole thing at the planetarium, the custom shows, and
oh
I don't know, it's
yeah.
just that small curated experience was awesome too. So, going forward as we keep getting bigger, it'd still be nice to get some of those curated things to come back in a bigger way, because some of those were just amazing and things that you won't forget. If you were there, nobody's going to forget that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like I tell my students this, right? And I'll say it in these um uh shows, or like when I do interviews or whatever, and I get the feeling like people look at me like I'm either a crazy person or like I'm like the monorail dude from The Simpsons who's trying to sell everybody a monorail. And when I talk about like the cool stuff that happens at GDEX, and I was like, I'm not bullshitting you here. Like the cool thing about running the show is that like I get to like put in whatever I want, right? So
Hmm.
like I go and reach out to people I want to meet or whatever. So we just made an announcement a couple days ago. YouTuber and Twitch streamer Mars is coming. She's someone that I started watching, I don't know, at some point in the pandemic. And then there was an episode that I was watching, and I don't remember what it was. It was maybe I don't know, Last of Us Part 2 or something. She was playing something, and she made a joke, and the joke was about something in Ohio. And I was like, wait, is she from Ohio? Or is she like near here? And then you would be, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised because you've gone to like GDC a lot,
Hmm.
and some of these other events, but like the number of people that have either lived in Ohio, have family in Ohio, or have some connection to Ohio in the games industry, like continuously blows my mind.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway, I get to kind of like put these things together, and the Grant Kirkhope one, that was year 3, right? Was that the first year we were
Trying to think.
at COSI,
I
or maybe
think
it was
that
the
was the
second?
first. It was either the first or no, the first Hope. First one was Damon Hatfield, and then the second one was Grant Kirkhope.
Okay, I can't remember anything
Yeah.
anymore.
I
But
am only remembering it because it's like I think I gave a talk that first one at COSI, and I was bummed because it was a new space. And then yeah, Damon Hatfield was there, and then the next year we actually had a chance to catch a breath, and we knew the space a little bit better, and that's when it became the big one for Grant Kirkhope.
okay, yeah. So Grant was the first session that we ever like had completely full room and people like waiting outside that we kind of had to shuffle in. Um, and Yeah, that was awesome. And then we outgrew COSI. Actually, I think I'm gonna go to COSI this afternoon, go see the Marvel exhibit there.
That's
Um,
nice.
but I just get to like make interesting, fun, Pumpkin, please stop. Fun experiences based on the things that like I want to do.
Hmm.
And then if other people are like, oh, this might be cool, like Grant, we met from Sean Beeson, who has also been on this show a couple episodes ago. But a lot of the folks that have come to GX have just been people like I just reached out to. you know.
Yeah.
I didn't know Damon Hatfield at all. I just saw him at a party, an IGN party at PAX. Didn't know Grant at all until I got connected from him and from Sean. Jesse Cox, I didn't know at all until I got connected to him. I mean, I could go on.
Yeah. Well, and I think
Go.
that's the great thing about the game industry as opposed to some others is because everybody does kind of work in seclusion in a lot of cases. Most folks in the industry do have that imposter syndrome and they're very open and supportive and want to talk and be part of events and stuff like that, like, oh, you're talking to me, thank you, because it's not like performers where you're out there and people are seeing you all the time,
Yeah,
barring some of the people that are doing that. But for a lot of them, they're just very down to earth, kind, and very approachable. And that's why it's also been good for, like, with my students and stuff. When I talk to them, I was like, "Hey, who are your idols in the game industry? Reach out to them, email them, tw- uh, send a tweet, whatever." And they're scared to at first, but as soon as they do, they're like, "Oh, yeah, they talked to us, they gave us advice. Like, I didn't realize they were approachable." And it's like, yeah, most folks in the industry are, and it's great.
yeah. I think you and I kind of come from the teaching angle. You've been teaching for how long have you been teaching now?
A little over 12 years. Yeah, about 12 and a half years. Columbus State, and then that's the full time, but then off and on with other stuff before that.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. I within the games industry, I'm about 6.5 years. I got my 5 year, my little 5 year trophy from Columbus State, like halfway through the pandemic, some year and a half ago or whatever.
That's
Um,
cool.
now I'm teaching at two universities, but uh, yeah, I think I agree. I've worked with some other industries before and other industries within entertainment, and uh, I really hate like your connections, your contacts are obviously you've been developing them, like not you necessarily, but we each develop our own networks and contacts and stuff. But man, there's certain industries where it's like this is my contact, and like I'm not going to give it to you unless I'm going to get something out of it, or I feel it's going to like set me up in some way. And like I don't
Yeah.
work like that. Like if I feel that like you're coming from a good place, I will connect you to virtually anybody in my. Now I'm not gonna like give you their like cell phone number or something, but I'll give you their
Yeah.
email.
Yeah,
Like
doing a connector email or something like that.
yeah, and that's one of the things that I think there's this differentiation that I found in the various segments of the games industry where there's like the people that are in the industry that have been kind of a part of the professional side, been a part of the businesses where they understand like the process of doing warm introductions and sending emails and stuff. But then there's a group, and this group, I'm not judging anyone. I just think it's a factor of where they came from. But I see this a lot of times with streamers and influencers and those folks.
Hmm.
Like they're really hesitant to do any kind of reach outs or to do a connecting email. It almost feels like they're almost like scared or intimidated to like ask somebody for something.
Yeah.
And
And
I'm
I
like,
think,
go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, I think part of that's also just the way you work. Because if you think of it, streamers are generally, yet again, working alone. They're by themselves, or if they've got some support, maybe someone running the switchboard or whatever else. But folks that work in the game industry, you get raised up really fast into this idea of collaboration. Like, you have to communicate, you have to share information, otherwise, whatever project you're on dies very quickly. And so I think it is that's a big part of it where I'm noticing this even right now trying to get a literary agent. In the game industry, if I have a question, I reach out. If I have a question about animation, I reach out, and people will connect me with other people. And I, whenever they're coming from that collaborative environment, they're really open with that. But with trying to get a literary agent, you've got all these other authors that are trying so hard to get seen that they'll be like, "Oh, well, here's some good advice for how to work on your letter. Here's some stuff to be aware of. Here's some good places to kind of look." But they won't make any kind of personal introductions because they're scared
Mm-hmm.
that it'll cost them a contract or a deal. Because if you do or say something, it reflects on them rather than trying to promote that, the larger collaborative effort. It's it's that very solo endeavor.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's it's a shame because like even with you just talking, right? Like I don't know if you remember GDEX TV 2020. We had Michael Laron on, he does Author Level Up. It's a YouTube channel.
Mhm.
So like he'd be like a guy that if you're interested in, I'd be happy to connect you with him because he writes books and he's published a bunch of stuff and he'd probably have some thoughts for you. Sorry, Pumpkin wants to play fetch.
Yeah.
Of course, now is the time she wants to play fetch. She always wants to play fetch. So,
That's like I got Nutmeg here asleep. Like she doesn't want to do anything until the
yeah.
kids get home.
Oh, did we lose Lucas? Is there something going on with? Let me just double check. Okay, no, never mind. My Twitch feed was looking funky for some reason, but looks like it's all good. But yeah, I think that's a big thing where if you want to have a welcoming community, a welcoming business, like if you want to be able to bring people in, like you have to keep that like ego, and this is where the influencer stuff kind of comes in. Like I'm the big guy. You got to keep that bullshit out of the door because that's not how you cultivate. That's how you cultivate something like Hollywood, where every connect is priceless, right? And I'm not going to give you anything unless I can get something from you. And that's not how, first of all, that's not how I think a healthy business functions, a healthy industry. And it's not something I want to be a part of. It's not something I want to live in. Like, I like, in general, if I hit somebody up, I was like, hey man, would you mind doing like a warm introduction to this person? 99% of the time they'll do it. You know,
Yeah.
they're just like, hey, I know this guy, he does this. Consider yourselves connected, you know, good luck.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's also partially like big versus small. Like we're coming very much from that indie side, especially here in Columbus. And I think because of that, because it's more grassroots, people are a lot more open. But in the industry as a whole, there's a lot of that too. But when you get bigger league, I think there may be some of that closure. Not always, like I said, because everybody kind of starts at those grassroots and in such a collaborative way.
Yeah.
But even with writing, like I'm finding tons of amazing groups of other writers. It's just having trouble making that connection to the, like I said, literary agents, publishers, which are a little bit more in that elite bubble.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to send a connect to
no, I appreciate it.
to my friend and if they can help you out. But yeah, I think that's too one of the things about. I feel like we're talking about GDEX a lot, which is fine.
Yeah,
I
we
guess
do that. That's
we
fine.
can talk about whatever. But
We'll
I
come
was
back
talking
to
to a
games and
friend.
childhoods abroad, you know.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend, and she kind of made fun of me a little bit because I had said something that, and I'm very careful about how I use my language, where particularly when it comes to GDEX and the community, because like I didn't build this by myself, you know, like this community and GDEX has been a part of multiple people putting in tons of time, but there also is a reality that like I started and made this thing happen, like that. There is a reality in that.
Yeah.
But I was talking about how proud I was about the community we've developed, and she kind of made fun of me, and she's like, you know, you should be more humble or whatever. I was like, this doesn't have anything to do with humility. It has to do with like stuff doesn't just fall out of the sky, you know,
Yeah.
like you, in order to make something like GDEX and to make a community like that, it takes effort. And, you know, people like you and I who have been in the industry a while, like, you know, over a decade, which is mind blowing. We set what the expectations are and we help teach, you know, we teach the youngins how to interact with folks. And one of the things we do at GDEX, actually, we had to, on one of our Reddit posts, I don't even know how this happened and I don't, whatever. But somehow we got started talking about banning, and then somebody else was responding. Is like, how many people have you banned over the years? And I was like, I don't think we've banned anyone, to be honest. At
No, I
GDEX.
think we had a discussion once about one individual, but
yeah,
they were
and
approached, they were talked to, and I
there
think that
might have
was
been
it.
like one in the back of my mind. There might have been like one person from the tournament space that like might have done something, but like, you know, we've never had any instances of violence. I knock on wood here,
No.
you know, I don't want to,
Yeah,
but we've never had
as it
any
gets
instances of
larger and
violence.
bigger.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be 17,000 people this year.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to get bigger. So that's where setting the expectations, setting the community standards is increasingly important. I think we've had like 2 instances of theft in the 10 years we've done it, and one of them, the thing got returned.
Yeah.
So like, you know,
I remember that.
yeah. But anyway, the point is that one of the things that I think also along the banning line is if it's too distracting, this playing with pumpkin, I
No, it's fine.
apologize. But along the banning line is like there's a threshold that I kind of give folks as part of the community, because we deal with a lot of different types of people. We deal with a lot of young people. Like you said, we deal with a lot of people who, whether it's on the development end or the YouTubing streaming end, don't interact with a lot of people outside of the digital space a lot.
Yeah.
And so I give them this like leeway where if somebody makes a mistake or does something, like I'll go and talk to them. Like I will go and talk to members of the community.
Yeah.
I consider that a responsibility of mine to kind of let them know what's acceptable and let them reshape
Yeah.
their behavior. Obviously, things like violence and stuff. That's
Yeah.
that's
Well,
sort of
and
like
thankfully,
that's
as you
an
point out,
instant.
we haven't had to deal with that. But just
Yeah,
from the social issues, we've talked about this a lot, but within education for video games, just a large number of the students have social, mental, learning, physical, or other types of disabilities. In particular, we attract a lot of students that are on the spectrum, particularly the Asperger's side. And that's reflected also in the gaming community. So people showing up to these events, there's not really any mean spirited or ill intent. It's just a lack of that social awareness.
yeah,
And anytime we've had issues, it's just talking to them directly. And not only has it gotten resolved, but then they have that as a tool set going forward for future events and connecting with others and even correcting their friends around them as they progress. So it's been
yeah.
good.
Yeah, I mean, totally. That's GDEX. I always say this: GDEX is a platform to help people be successful, to learn more about the industry, share what they're working on, connect with each other. So if I can help somebody, and I've had one of my students from Columbus State. I remember she was like, I don't know, I'm super introverted. Like I could never go to something like GDEX or whatever. I was like, I'll tell you what, why don't you come to the COG, the game dev community? Just sit in the back. You don't have to say anything. Just show up and sit in the back. And so she did it one week, and then she ended up coming another one. And then she ended up volunteering at GDEX for like 2 or 3 years. It's just like once you
Yep.
kind of build up that skill set, this is where sort of back to my public health promotion background. People throw around resilience as a term. That's what resilience is understanding that like and I'm simplifying things obviously, but like I may have X, ADHD, whatever it is.
Hmm.
That shouldn't be where the conversation stops.
No.
I have X, so now I can't do anything. Like no, like
Yeah.
I have this, or I suffer from this, or like I've got anxiety, stressing out about GDEX, that's for damn sure. But public speaking is always an example that I give. Like I used to be terrified of public speaking. Like I did not want to do it at all. And now you could throw me in pretty much any room in front of any size audience. Hopefully it's something I know what I'm talking about, but like I've done talks in front of 3 people and I've done talks in front of 2,000 people, you know? And
Yep.
it's a skill set I developed over time.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's a big part of what we try to do at GDEX and we try to do with the community, is realizing that you don't have to be everything to everyone. Just find out what your passions are, find out what you think you're good at or you're interested in, and then build around your strengths to accomplish those things. You know?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, and this came up in one of your previous sessions, but you were talking about labels and things like that, and how they're not overly useful, um,
Mm,
but or they can be detrimental to have them. But at the same time, as a starting point, that's where it can be helpful because, like, hey, I have this, like that's great, and you're right, it's a starting point. It's because we know that this is an issue. We have these things that we already have built in as tool sets to support you because we know these are likely things that could be attached to it. But then people
yeah.
grow from there. Like I mean, you've seen the progress of some of the people that have come through, the students, and I know exactly which student you're talking about. But I had another one that I was just amazed with. Came in with Asperger's, Tourette's, a whole like list of issues. And so they started with those labels, but over time they developed the friendships, they developed the skill sets, the personal abilities that that student grew. And by the end, I mean, they were the leader of their team. They were uh, secured their own internship, got a job, and developed a great set of social skills that were non-existent at the beginning. And
Yeah.
GDEX does the same thing. I mean, it's a community like any other. People come that first year, maybe you're struggling, but they find a lot of people that are similar to themselves that have similar common interests, and then grow from there.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And when I talk about the labeling, like you label me, you negate me idea, it really is based around that idea, which
yeah,
is
if it sticks, like
yeah,
you can never
if you
progress
create a
past
bunch of if
that.
you create a bunch of labels for yourself, then other people will fit their biases into those labels. Some of them right, some of them
Yeah.
wrong. Like the reality of existence is there's so much information. Like we have to
You
compartmentalize
got it.
stuff.
Yeah.
Our
Well,
brains will explode. But
well,
there are biases that can come with that. So there's sort of like the outward bias coming into you about stuff, but then
mhm,
there's also your internal bias of here's all these labels that I have given
yeah,
myself. Like people will talk about um someone trying to get healthier, right? And it's just like,
yeah,
oh, I'm not a runner, or I'm not a gym goer or whatever. You're already starting yourself out in a bad position, right?
yeah.
Because what you
Well,
are is actually the habits you accrue and do consistently.
yeah.
That's what you are. Sorry.
Well, and along with that, like it's also dealing with other people's inability to cope as well. My wife's looking into psychology, but me and her have been avid. As you can see, this is only like maybe a third of our bookshelves. We're avid readers, and we have deep dived heavily into psychology. And one of the things that keeps coming up is that idea of you know not managing yourself, or excuse me, how do I put it? A lot of times when we're worried about what we're doing because of people's reactions, it has nothing to do with us. It's really other people's inability to cope with or deal with, their situation or with us.
Oh, sure.
And I've found that like even at the college, I started keeping bees quite a few years back as I needed to do something for my health. I was trying to break out of a bad place. And it's like, what is something that's been on my bucket list that I'm never going to get around to, especially where I'm at, what I'm doing? I'm going to keep bees. Um, and so I made it happen because it became like this mental health, life choice. And so I reached out to some people around me, found a place where I could do it, started studying as much as I could, and I started keeping bees.
Hmm.
Well, all the people that got to know me during that time period knew me as the bee person because they said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm keeping bees."
Yeah.
Well, a couple years later, I shifted on to other types of self sufficiency and gardening and doing kimchi and sauerkraut. So for a few people that met me then, I was the sauerkraut guy or whatever else. And it's interesting because I can remember when I met people because of how they've pigeonholed or labeled me. So
Mm.
for some people I'm the video game guy, for some people I'm the scoutmaster guy, for some people I'm that art guy, for some people now I've been trying to do mushrooms. So we did lion's
Yeah, I
mane
was,
off of
I was
the,
gonna
the
say
off of
mushrooms is
what
a
I
new
got from
thing.
your tree. So that's been a recent hobby. Or last year I was doing chainmail. Yet again, these are things that I'm doing for my mental health and personal growth and stuff, but I get labeled in those things, and it's really hard for people to see that larger picture of no, this is Henry. He does a lot of these weird things, and
Yeah.
he's a whole person. And yeah, I think it's just people managing themselves too, because it's hard for them to get past that and see the larger individual.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what I kind of try to get across is like you can't control how the world is going to react or perceive you. I mean, there's certain things you can obviously do based on your mannerisms and the way you dress and yada yada. You
Yeah,
know, it can be helpful to like sometimes just fit into social norming just to like get through the day, right? You know, uh, my Tina and I we always talk about this, but like it really, I think one of the big signs of maturity is knowing when to pick your battles, like you don't
Mhm.
have to fight everything all the time. And sometimes it's just easier to be like, all right, I'm just going to do this thing, right? I'm just going to go, like,
Yeah.
it's easier to follow traffic laws than to not follow traffic laws, because the consequence of not following them is going to be a huge pain in the ass. That's kind of a silly example, but you can apply that to anything.
Yeah.
Um, but ultimately, you get to control yourself and you get to
Yeah.
decide how you want to be perceived, but you also get to decide, does it really matter how I'm perceived? Doesn't
Yeah.
matter that I'm the bee guy or the mushroom guy or the whatever. I suppose as long as you're not like the asshole guy, then you're probably
Yeah.
doing okay.
Well,
Um,
and so I think that's where a lot of fear in the industry, and because this is a show about creativity and games and stuff, I think that's where a lot of fear and where a lot of people get held back in that creative process comes from. Because as soon as you get that label where you become, the art guy or the sound guy or whatever else, there's that expectation that comes along with that as well. Like as soon as I
mhm.
got labeled as, the 3D modeler, everything had to be perfect because if there was anything less, then I wasn't living up to that title. And
Mm,
nobody was really putting that. I mean, some people were, but it was an expectation that I had created because of that labeling.
yeah.
Um, and so I think we're talking about, a little bit about fear of people coming into these events or fear within the community. That's where a lot of it comes from, is because that fear of, if I go, then I'm identifying myself as something. I'm putting myself out there. I'm then a gamer, but if I don't know all the games, what are they going to think about me? If I can't, do perfect sound design, if I put out a flop song, what are these other musicians going to think? Rather than seeing that larger picture of you're more than that. And for
Yeah.
whatever good you do, there's a lot of junk behind that that's absolute failures along the way because that's the growth process.
Oh, totally.
So,
Totally. I mean, even again, thinking about like GDEX, like there's been numerous times where we've done a GDEX and people are like, "Oh man, this is best ever. Like everything's so smooth, everything's running so good." And like Cody and I look at each other like, "Oh my God," like behind the scenes to get the thing to that point
yeah.
was just like, I mean, it was like, you know, a burning wreckage pathway of corpses behind us to get the thing to that, like Cody's over there
Oh,
like missing an arm and like my shirt's like half ripped or whatever. It's just like, but people don't see those things.
no, no. I mean, even day of last year when it was the new mix of us trying to combine with Origins
Mhm.
and just getting people badges, trying to deal with just all. I got
And
so many
there
miles
was a
in.
new system. Yeah, there
Yeah,
was a
just.
new platform.
But yeah, this is why I want to do roller skates this year during load in, because last year just the mileage of walking back and forth and trying to get the communication lines, and it was chaos. But people arriving day of never saw that. It was just, oh wow, this is nice, and
Yeah.
saw
Yeah.
all the good.
And
So
along the lines of the thing you were talking about before, I think from a career business perspective,
mhm,
you do want to try to be excellent at something.
yeah,
Like focus on something, and if you like 3D modeling, it's okay to be the 3D modeler dude and be really good at it. Um, but realize that there are other things that can both augment that and make that
mhm,
skill better. And then you're also allowed to do other things and you're allowed
yeah,
to change your mind. If you do 3D modeling for 5 years and you're like, I don't, it's very common, for example, for people that do 3D modeling for a long time that eventually they might find their way into like rigging and animating instead,
yeah,
like they prefer to do that instead of the modeling, or maybe texturing or even visual effects. You see that sometimes with programmers will move into like the visual effects territory because they really
yeah,
like particle and lighting effects and whatever.
yeah,
So you don't have to do the same thing all the time,
mhm,
but the thing you're focusing on, try to be good at.
yeah. Well, and at the same time, also don't once you hit a certain level of proficiency, it's not being afraid of still trying stuff, still, even sharing things. For me, I went under this myself where I hit a period where I was scared to share anything that wasn't just absolute A level. Um, and it limited me. I closed myself off. I started hiding more. And I still have a tendency to do that. Like, we're both introverts,
Yeah.
extroverted introverts, but um but yeah, I was hiding tons of stuff, and because of that, it hampered my progression. I got so scared of sketching in public for a long time because I was worried that someone would come over and go, "Oh, you're an artist." Oh, and then judge me on whatever my latest sketch was. That it actually stopped my progression. And really, it's been liberating to start sharing, like, hey, here's the junk that's not so good. Even on Facebook for family and friends, I started doing this Friday karaoke because I like to sing and I'm tired of hiding it.
Mhm.
And it's not the greatest, and I miss notes and I screw up, but you know what? It's fun and it's a journey, and it's okay.
Yeah, man. You're doing
And
it,
so,
you're enjoying it.
yeah,
Life really should be just a series of experiences and play that eventually will
yeah,
build you into the person that you will become, you
yeah,
know? Uh yeah, I agree. I think ultimately what I'm very proud of with GDEX is just the number of times that I have heard that people are like, hey, I found, I don't know if you remember Irina, she was our volunteer coordinator a couple of years ago,
hmm,
Russian PhD student. And she's like, I found my thesis at GDEX. I was like, what? Like your
awesome,
PhD thesis you discovered while volunteering at GDEX. And we've had numerous volunteers that have found really good friends or
yeah,
found
or even internships and employment.
internships, um and so just being out there, being engaged, trying stuff. um we've got I won't announce it yet, but we have a mutual friend who just got a really cool job at a really big game company, and so
Yeah,
I'm hoping to have him on the
and
show.
was a volunteer at GDEX
Oh,
and
for many
student
years.
and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
well, one of my students in the intro class,
Hmm.
all grown up now. Uh,
It's so nice
although
when they come back and tell us.
yeah, our little bird has to go fly. Um,
Uh,
but
well,
yeah. Oh, sorry, you're gonna say
that's
that?
great. No, I was gonna say I kind of want to. I'm just checking, making sure we still have time, but I kind of want to wrap this around back to talking about games because that's where it gets
Sure.
fun stuff. So we're talking about this experience about people making connections because that's what we're doing. We're creating a community. We're building the socialization. We're developing skill sets. I a lot of the kids now, when I talk with them, and I say kids because I'm getting so old, and you are too. We're hitting that age.
Hey, now.
Um, but yeah, I know. We get the special medical exams every time we go in. Like they're checking me for cancer every time.
Yeah,
Um,
I had my 40-year-old checkup a couple
oh
months ago. And
yes.
it was fine. Oh, my friend was like,
It's
is
like,
like,
oh, that's part of the procedures now. Great, thank you.
yeah, my friend was
Um,
like, is that where they start doing the butt stuff? And I was like, no, not yet, not yet. No colonoscopies yet.
Yeah. But anyways,
Anyway,
but talking with people there, they thought that socialization with games only started after the internet, where it's, hey, now you can hop online and play with friends. And while that's kind of true, unless you were in person before or in an arcade, which was, another great socializing thing, there was actually this other experience that happened that people don't talk about near as much anymore. When we were growing up, there was a lot fewer game releases. There's still a lot, but there's usually a couple of the big hits every year. Most folks were, even if you didn't get Nintendo Power, you'd see it in the magazine rack and go, "Ooh, that's the big Christmas release." And for quite a few years, for like the SNES days, it was always a SquareSoft game, like Final Fantasy VI or Secret of
yeah,
Mana, and so people in completely different locations. For a while, I was, I grew up in South America. Um, I was having experiences down there playing games that other people in completely different parts of the world were also having. And so while we weren't having it together, it became a source of friendship and community throughout my life. Like no matter where I moved, if I found that other kid that had played a similar game or that was a gamer, yet again, that goes back to the labeling because back then it wasn't as cool to be a gamer. Um, but I could find that other kid that was labeled as a gamer and we could start talking and we instantly had this shared nostalgia, this shared experience of, do you remember? Oh, I remember that too. When Sirius was singing up on top. Oh yeah, man, and
yeah.
It's amazing how much community that there was through these disparate shared experiences. And so we actually did have a lot of connectivity even back then through games and through that community.
Totally. I don't know if you saw the Uncharted movie or not.
Mhm. I
Um,
did.
but the intro of that, Sony's done it a couple times. Sonic, I think, might have had it too. I can't remember. But it was a little intro. No, it wouldn't have been Sonic. Was that Sony? Doesn't matter. I can't remember. But anyway, it definitely was on Uncharted. They did one of those like little kind of Marvel intros where it was all of these like game characters from Sony's library, and how like Marvel will like do the comic book flipping and you see all the Hulk and Spider-Man and whatever.
Mhm.
And I was like, I thought that was really cool because first of all, I knew almost all those characters just through osmosis being in the
Yeah.
game industry. But my friend Jeremy that I went to see the movie with, like that didn't mean anything to him really. Like he didn't even know what Uncharted was. We were just going for fun. Um,
Oh, okay.
but I think it's cool to see that that thread, that communal thread is like percolating up into the larger, there's always been video game movies and stuff, but they've been like their
Mhm.
own little things. Now
Yeah.
they're like trying to build this universe around those ideas.
Yeah.
And I think it's neat because there is you go, I can't remember, somebody made a joke a couple weeks ago that was like kind of a deep cut video game joke. And like I didn't expect it to come out of their mouth. And two, as soon as they said it, I was like, that was an awesome joke. Like just because, it's something that like only a select group of people would
Well,
get,
yeah,
you
it's
know?
one of those in jokes. Like if I tell a chemistry joke, small number of people get it, or the Robin Williams joke from Bicentennial Man. A Buddhist walks up to a hot dog vendor and says, "Make me one with everything." There's only a small number of people that make that connection. You
Oh,
get it.
Robin Williams
It
was a
takes an
gem.
understanding of, anyway,
Yeah.
but I think they used to call it the Frasier Effect, because only a small number of people watching Frasier actually got some of the deeper jokes. Like they'd laugh at some of the situational stuff, but there were
Sure.
some actual intelligent jokes in there that people were laughing, but they didn't know why they were laughing. Um, because only a small portion of people actually understood the background to get it.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cool that games have entered that because, like you said, when we were growing up, like the term nerd and it was not a positive connotation. And there was a ton of people that played video games. It was a big industry, but nothing like today.
Oh no,
And
now it's everybody.
yeah, and it's like all these like all the loners in their basement that are introverts or whatever, like all those like stereotypes, those started popping up when we were kids,
Yeah.
and they were really a variant of the like computer nerd engineer
Yeah.
idea that just sort of transferred into the video game
And there
space
was
because
also a spit-off of like the sci-fi kids, those
yeah.
nerds, and the punk rock movement. And there were all these other disparate communities, and all of them were kind of, you know, given this negative connotation.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, totally. And it's
yeah.
just it's a different world now, like the younger generation. Um it's just something you've grown up with. It's like,
Yeah.
this thing right here, I still find amazing. Just the technology and the phones and the way that like, I got my iPhone, for example. The first one came out on my birthday, 2007. And I wasn't even sure I was going to get one. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to the Apple store and see if they have an extra one. And they did. And I got it. So I've had an iPhone, not every version of the iPhone, but I've had an iPhone since they first came out. And like people forget the difference between a smartphone and an iPhone in 2007 was like leagues different, leagues different. And now
Yeah.
this technology is everywhere. Touch
Oh yeah.
displays and everything is just par the
It's just
course,
common.
right? Yeah, and so
Yeah.
we've kind of grown up seeing these transitions.
Hmm.
You talk about shared experiences like couch co-op. We used to just go to our friend's house and
Yeah.
play games. Like Tina would always joke about. She's just like, I don't. I remember like the first time I was inviting someone over to hang out and play video games, and she's like, he's not gonna want to do that. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, why would anybody want to come over and watch someone play video games? I was like, what are you talking about? Like, that's a totally common
It is.
thing. Like, you'll either play the game together if it's a, a co-op or a multiplayer game of some kind, but it's completely common to have somebody come over and like you share the controller or you just watch them. Jake has been coming over and playing The Last of Us, and I watch him play it
Mhm.
because I want to see his reaction to it and experience to it. But for her, that was just like, why would anybody want to come over and watch somebody play video games? And I was just like, I mean, that's what we did when we were kids, because
Yeah.
you talk about
Like, if you
Nintendo and
couldn't
Super
play it, you
Nintendo.
wanted to be seeing it.
Yeah,
Uh,
I remember. I think I talked about this too on another episode. But when Resident Evil came out and Metal Gear Solid, when those games came out, because they were single player games, I mean, we played them all the time, and
yeah.
we would just go to people's houses and just watch because they were such amazing games.
Yeah.
And just somebody would play it for an hour and switch off controllers or whatever.
Oh, well, and I remember the first time that I saw a game portrayed in social media, or not social in regular media, and I mean outside of movies, because we like had, you know, uh, some stuff that was coming out, like Captain N, and we had,
Mhm.
The Wizard.
The
But
Wizard.
in just
The movie's
yeah,
awesome.
it's so awesome. I still have my Power Glove.
It's not very
Uh,
good, but it's really
no,
awesome.
but it was still good. Um, but I remember the first time, like I saw it, and it was normalized and I was just salivating for months because of it. So there was an episode of Full House where they showed Zelda 2 before it was released.
Oh
And you see
wow.
this side-scrolling Link fighting a slime, and it's just like, that's Link.
Yeah.
Like, and they're playing a game on TV, on regular TV, not a movie about games. This was just regular.
Yeah.
And I remember how mind-blowing that moment was to see that, and then to have that preview of the game that every child that saw that was just waiting, bated breath. Like, also a beautiful piece of marketing
Oh
to
yeah.
give that little
Totally.
tidbit because everybody caught what it was, and then you had to wait. There was
Yeah.
no word about it for a
That's
while.
that's another thing too. Games in TV shows and movies. There's
Mhm.
always like a little thing where you can tell like the people making the movie say it's like, oh, they get video games because
Yeah,
there's tons of like someone on couch just playing, hitting all the buttons on a controller, and then it might show the screen occasionally, and it's like it's either some made up game or it's just some segment of a game that you would never play the way they're playing it, right?
yeah.
But every so often in a movie or a TV show, people are playing a game the way you actually would play that game. And you can tell that the creators get it. And nobody else, like people like Tina, somebody's playing a video game, that's all they think about. It does not occur
Yeah.
to them at all. But you notice, it's like if someone's not driving a car the right way, like you notice.
Well,
And
in
so,
some cases were more than others. If you remember the N64, you had to contort for that controller. So any media during
oh,
that
sure.
time where someone was showing that, it's like my go-to way was because I'm right-handed, holding that center and then wrapping my hand up over the top to get the buttons and be able to hit both hips. Like that was so anybody like holding it, I'm doing this, and they're doing stuff like there's no possible way for you to play that way. Like you
Yeah.
you literally have to contort to play with that controller.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the N64, but the
It's still
controller
great.
the controller was something
It was
something
whack,
up.
but it was still so many good
You
games for
know,
that
for
system.
for all the Nintendo's faults, they're at least willing to try stuff, and
Oh yeah,
usually even their failures, particularly within controllers, um, the industry learns from those and
yeah.
adapts to it, in
Well,
pretty
and
smart
as much
ways.
as they're a software company, they've also still from the beginning been a very much a hardware company.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the fact like they were going, "Hey, how does this system work?" Well, let's make our light gun kind of. I mean, just kind of reverse engineering, but then from there, just exploring stuff. The fact that they had motion control or a semblance of it back in the Power Glove days, and then you see the iterations build up to the latest stuff.
Mhm.
And it's just cool to see the developments.
Yeah, the Nintendo Zapper, like, worked pretty well for the
Yeah,
'80s. For the '80s,
yeah,
it worked pretty well.
it was good.
Um,
Well,
which
and
is not
actually how much better it was than the other ones that were out at the time, which were just like Nintendo, it was harder to fake out, like, it was much
yeah.
more accurate.
Well,
So
and there's been a series of guns. We're going down the thing there that are
I
using
know.
the accelerometers and stuff, and even those weren't as accurate as like the Zapper or was it the Super Scope 6?
Hmm.
Um, so and like
Which
even
I
though
would
I
still like to see that come back. Like,
the Super Scope.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't I talked about this a couple months ago, but you don't really see, at least at home console use, you don't see gun games anymore. Like,
No, not
you
as
know.
much. Also, peripherals in general have kind of dried up. Like that was how they extended life cycles of game systems. It'd be you have the system come out, and then a couple years later, you'd have some kind of peripheral that would
Mhm.
bring life back to it, and then a couple years later, then we move on to the new console. But of the latest ones, they're not doing much with peripherals.
Yeah.
It's just everything's kind of all in one,
Well, the
and
big
they're focusing on that.
yeah, the big peripheral right now is VR, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
it's a platform and a peripheral, and so and it also comes obviously with the controllers that have motion sensing in them. So
Hmm.
that whole thing, that whole platform is kind of it's like all the stuff's just merged into that, and
Yeah.
that's what we're kind of trying right now, which is cool because
Yeah.
they're pushing 3D audio, they're pushing high def texturing. The PSVR 2 specs look really great.
Yeah.
Um, the Oculus has made huge strides. I mean, so was some of the other platforms,
Mhm.
HTC Vive and Sony. So, but I think the Oculus, at least early on in the VR days, really moved motion controllers in a
Mhm.
positive way and movement within a space in a really strong way. So we're starting to see all those pieces kind of come together now,
Yeah,
which
I think the
I think's
big
cool.
thing for me with those is just still getting up, system speeds so you get higher frame rates,
Mm.
and then working out some of the issues because I wanted to do VR so much from the early days, but especially the early ones where they couldn't even get up to 30 frames a second.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I don't know what it was, like, I'm part of that percentage that just instant nausea and sickness, and then it
Oh,
would last
yeah,
for a couple days,
I
and
do
the
too.
latest ones I do better, like, I can do about 3 to 4 minutes, but then it takes a couple hours, and so it's like, I'm waiting
Yeah,
for it to get to that point where it's so accessible and up to snuff that I don't have any of those issues, and then I think it'll boom bigger 'cause, that's the biggest thing I like, "Well, why don't you VR?" "Well, I get dizzy spells or I get nauseous." It's like, if we can break
yep.
that barrier, like the health barrier, where suddenly we're up at good speeds, that's where I think that's gonna really blow up.
Yeah, I hear you. I have the same thing. I think VR might ultimately be something that, I mean, we do VR development and I'll test stuff, but like when I go to
Yeah.
GDEX, I rarely play the VR games because I know if I get sick, it's gonna be for a couple hours at least, and I don't want to be at GDEX where I have to
Yeah.
like do things or run around and solve problems, and I don't want to be like nauseous.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. VR might be just something I end up skipping until I can
Yeah.
just like plug into the back of my head and just go
Or it might
straight in.
yeah, it might be that next step where we're waiting for the fully immersive VRR MMOs.
Yeah. Yeah,
But, yeah, because I mean, even you had a, ah, no, my brain's gone. The, Virtual Boy.
I
Like,
did.
yeah, the Virtual Boy was an extension of the previous, the set of glasses where you go through and have the 2
Mhm.
images. Um,
Dude,
but
people
yeah,
rip on the Virtual Boy. The Virtual Boy
it was great.
had some great stuff. It was a lot
Yeah.
of fun.
But then you had that jump to, later then we had the 3DS where it was mostly built in. And then, and so it's like all these things have these jumped iterations where they're making improvements. So yeah, we got VR now, but what's that next iteration going to look like? How cool is that going to be? So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
excited for it. I think there's
yeah,
still a lot in the
I
future coming.
I'm very I'm very curious. I'm excited that we are, excuse me, we're at a time in games where there's still some companies that are always going for that like photorealistic top end graphics kind of things. Call of Duty tends to go that direction.
Yeah.
Last
Um,
of Us Part 2 I think is an amazing looking game, like amazing looking game. But I like that a lot of people are like not worrying about trying to have the best looking game in the world. Like they're stylizing it or using the
mhm.
aesthetics in a cohesive way. But then they're using that rendering and computational power for other things like AI of characters or
Yeah.
synchronous multiplayer abilities. You know, like the idea, like with Fortnite, having 100-person game, multiplayer game at the same time, like in the 90s, are you joking? Like that wasn't even a, you know, we would do Doom and Quake and stuff, and we were lucky if, you know, you could do a 6 or 8 player game without at least a couple people lagging out or jumping all over the place. And so that's one of the things I'm excited about is like what kind of really cool enemy AI can we do? You
Yeah.
know, what kind of like neat simulations can we make, you know, that use
Yeah.
physics in some kind of cool way? Um, and
Well,
if you're
and
not
even
spending all
wrap.
the, go ahead,
Oh, sorry.
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, just go
Uh,
ahead.
I was gonna say, well, and that kind of wraps us back to that Nintendo model of success. I loved that a lot of their systems they actually kept on the low end of specs. Like when we got into that heavy race between them and Sony and Microsoft and stuff like that, they actually held back on a lot of that with the technology, which
Hmm.
forced the games to change what their perspective was. So when I was working on a couple of games that we did multi-platform games at the first studio I was at, um, when we'd work on stuff for like the Xbox and the PlayStation 2, it was very different than jumping over to the DS. I loved the DS titles because suddenly I was limited. You know, a
Hmm.
thousand triangles on screen, or excuse me, in a level, and maybe half of that on screen at a time. So we are absolutely limited, but it helped me focus in what the art was, and I think the gameplay got a lot better on those. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, even with my own projects, when I can stylize or do something like that, I can focus on other things, and I think it looks better because you get companies like Bethesda's doing better lately, but for a while it was a lot of recycled things, a lot of just mashed photos for textures, and the realism was fast and cheap and easy, but it didn't really help the experience. And then you had something like Borderlands come out where they ended up having to make a last minute design decision where they stylized it, and suddenly I was like, wow, this is different. This is it stands out more.
Yeah. So funny
So
enough, this week in our Columbus State classes for us was aesthetics, talking about aesthetics and Nintendo is I usually wrap around the conversation to end with Nintendo because I like to illustrate that you don't need a lot of computational power to have really good art design and to make things cohesive. And that's
mhm.
why, like, obviously, there's Nintendo games that you look at and you're like, oh, this is like an older game. You can see it. But like most of them, almost all of them still look good in some sense. And you go
Yeah,
back and look at, you talk about PS1 and PS2 games. My God, like the things that looked amazing back then look like utter garbage now, you know?
yeah,
And that's just how it is. But you can make some really good, something like, I think about like The Witness or Firewatch or BioShock. Like those games are always going to look good.
yeah,
Like it doesn't matter how far in the future we get. Yeah, they might like look a little older at some point, but their art direction was so precise, so thoughtful that it doesn't matter when you play that game, it will always look good. You
yeah,
know, I think BioShock looks amazing. Like that game, the environments in that game are just, you know.
yeah.
Anyway, I could
Well,
gush about BioShock all day.
no, I was gonna say this is where we get into the fan stuff. Well, did you ever play Wild Arms for the PlayStation One?
I did not, but I had a friend who played it who really liked
Okay,
it.
so that's one that like to me encapsulates like this whole discussion because they had the traditional 2D art that everybody had gotten really good at. And you look at
Hmm.
that and it's solid. They had the cutscenes, which now you could do because we're on disc media. And these were full anime animations, beautiful music and sound and everything. So you have these beautiful cutscenes, the anime cutscenes, go to the 2D sprite work. But then you get into the battle system. And that's where it just visually fell apart because you jump into the battles and suddenly they're 3D and you have
Mm.
lag and you have choppiness. And the 3D was not gorgeous 3D. It was, hey, let's make a monster that's got like maybe 40 polygonal faces and it's very cubic and the textures weren't great. And it was still an awesome game, great experience, but just
Sure.
visually they're trying to explore stuff, but you could see which held up and which were just absolutely dying and struggling to try and get there.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, you got to start somewhere, right? You got to
yeah.
move from somewhere. One of the things I love, uh, I think it is very, very rare.
Mhm.
Not only very, 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 very rare for a human being to be able to find something they love and be there pretty much from the start to its current day. You know, like people love movies, right? But how
Mhm.
many people are alive when movies started
Yeah.
120 years ago? The answer is not many, if any, right?
No.
Um, but we grew up, like we were born into the period of gaming on PC and game consoles. And it's pretty cool to like be able to not only think about it academically, like where games have come from, but like, oh no, I
Yeah.
played that game. Like
Yeah.
I remember what it was like. So like when I'm teaching class about something, I might go and talk about a game from the 80s or 90s, but for them it's all conceptual,
Yeah.
right? They've never played the game. They don't get what it was like to see something like Super Mario World come out and be like, this game is gorgeous, you know?
Yeah. Oh,
Uh
and
but
and that's just it. I mean, some of those are experiential that even if they can go back and play the game, they're never gonna have that same experience because it's not just the game, it's everything leading up to it. For me, it's
yeah.
that one time a year where we would go to Toys R Us, like, in
Mhm.
preparation for Christmas, and then you could see the new stuff or the like, even now you get a disc and, yeah, it's got kind of some tactility, but there's nothing like those old cartridges where you would open or take off the plastic, open up the box, pull it out, pull the cartridge out, like the NES or Super NES, out of the plastic, and it had a distinct smell
Yeah.
that, like, every time you open that up, it was part of that experience.
And it
Or,
had it had a manual, like the
had a manual.
manuals
I
that were
still have my manuals, and those, like, just absolute gold, just going through and seeing
yeah,
the
they're like the
illustrations.
album inserts where they're a piece of art in and of themselves a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
times.
And then even those were an experience, or even going to whatever, if you didn't have something like a Hollywood or a Blockbuster, like even before those, whatever your local video rental place, where they finally started renting games, it was like, oh, good, they have those now. Um, Going in, and for me, like Final Fantasy VI is indelibly tied to autumn. So anytime the leaves change, and I smell popcorn, because that's what it
Mm,
was. I'd go into the video rental place. That's when it kind of was releasing
yeah,
pre-Christmas, and they always had a popcorn machine at the front that is permanently tied. So when those two get together, it's the start of autumn, a little bit crisper, the leaves are falling, I'm getting that autumn smell, and I walk inside and my wife's making popcorn for a movie or something, heavy butter. I want to play Final Fantasy VI again. I want that experience.
yeah,
And the same thing's true for so many other games because it's beyond the game. It's that life experience that was tied to it. And that's why my
yeah,
kids can play the games and they'll come, and yet again, we talk about that disparate but shared experience. And like, oh, dad, this happened. I'm like, yeah, wasn't that great? And I still remember that and we have that connection. But they also don't have those other parts of the experience that,
yeah.
are just, it's that time period thing.
Yeah, it definitely I love the saying that everything was better back when everything was worse. I always found that just a charming thing because there is something, and I'm sure it's how like our parents felt about growing up in like the 50s and 60s and how
Oh, yeah.
people, every period has its own like nuances that you just don't quite get
Hmm.
unless you were there. But I
Well, it's
do
also the
sort
tie to the personal nostalgia, like your personal experiences that are
oh
attached
yeah,
to that too.
totally. But I feel like today there's so much stuff going. There's so many video games, right? That it's pretty rare that a game comes, a Minecraft obviously like took the world by storm, and
Yeah.
every time like a GTA comes out, that's like a really big deal. But it's like I remember when the first GTA came out. I remember when GTA 3 came out and people were like, "What in the hell is this game? This is amazing," you know?
Hmm.
Uh that's how I feel. I feel the same way about Last of Us Part 2. I think that game is sort of genre and industry forwarding in a very strong way, but that has a lot to do with like its conceptual nature and its narrative structure and stuff.
Yeah.
But it definitely is a different kind of thing. But I'm just curious about how, like, I mean, you've got a bunch of kids, like, do they have like, what is their shared experiences like with their peers?
That's where it's harder because for some things they can connect, but they have to be it's almost back like when we were kids and we would only find that one or two other people in an entire school that played video games. Like it was a very disparate experience because of that. And they've got the same thing now because now it's everybody plays games. Even if you don't identify as a gamer, you play games because it's
Sure.
everywhere. Um, but it's now about finding your groups within that. It's like everybody listens to music, but are you a punk rock? Are you a classic rock? Are you a, ska? Are you a where do you fall in that? So my kids, they do have some of the things like so they do have the larger commonalities like Minecraft, like Terraria, some of those builder games, and for those they can socialize. But there's a lot that they can't get. Nintendo still kind of ties them together because as soon as they say, "Hey, Zelda, Breath of the Wild," that's a large number of people.
Yeah.
But my oldest boy finally got through uh, Horizon Zero Dawn,
Mm.
and
I'm
so
still working on.
there's yeah, it's a great game. But there's a smaller number of people that can connect with that, and I think the thing is now we've hit that place where it's harder to connect because there's so much more. um,
Yeah.
where there's that nice there was the early period where you only connected with a few people because it wasn't really done. We hit this middle period, I'd say like late middle to late 90s, where it started to become more popular in early 2000s. There's still a more limited number of games, but a lot of people. And then PS2 came out, and I don't even remember how many titles they had, and suddenly we started getting inundated. And then it grew from there with the internet and mobile games and stuff like that. And now there's so many.
Yeah.
I
I
never
think that,
thought playing games would become work, but I've got a list of like, oh, I need to play these games. I can't even get to them, let alone all the ones I'm not even
oh,
seeing.
sure.
So it's harder to have that shared
Dude,
experience if it's
I
not a
have
larger title.
absolutely. I have my game club, on Facebook, my game club Facebook group, and like I post a game every month. I don't think I've beaten any of the games I've posted in 8 months. And it's not because I don't
Yeah.
want to. It's just I'm incredibly busy and there's just so much stuff going on.
Yeah.
And I'm addicted to Path of Exile, so that's a problem. But game is so good. Game is so good. But yeah, I agree. I think that whatever analogy you want to use, the dam blew open when Xbox really started pushing the Xbox Arcade, when the indie games really started filtering out. I think that's when
Hmm.
the trickle started to become a flood. Because yeah, even in the late 90s to mid 2000s, it's like yeah, there were a lot more games, but like there were still like the big ones that would come out. You still had your Grand Theft Autos, Halos, Rock Band. You know, there were still these games that came out that like everyone played,
Yeah.
and then now there's tons of them where just everyone. It's pretty rare when there's a game. I think Elden Ring is maybe one of those right now that everyone's talking about, and like it's pulling in people who would never play a Dark Souls style game, a Souls
Hmm.
game. So I think that that's one of them.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
I think part of that is also presentation too, because like even God of War, I tried the early God of Wars, I couldn't get into them. They were mechanical, but then the latest one, holy cow! Now that they added a
yeah.
story and not just a story, like a good story, like
Hmm.
it changed the experience and blew up. And suddenly that was a game that suddenly started having more outreach. And it goes back to that old thing with just it's so good. You tell somebody who tells somebody else who tells somebody else, and I think that's one that also brought a lot of people into the God of War series.
Oh,
Um, and so
I never really played the earlier ones. And I bought the new one and I really liked it. And that gameplay, just funny enough, as a side note, that gameplay style for the new God of War is very similar to Dark Souls style games. Um,
mhm,
Particularly if you play it on the hardest difficulty level, it's pretty much
yeah.
like a From Software game.
Yeah.
Um, it's brutal.
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
and for me, the big thing was, that transition to the narrative. Because for me, I like a good story in a game.
yeah,
Sometimes
I,
I like it just a mechanical game, but those gotta be, like, time wasters. But yeah, beyond that, it's like, I want a good story. Like, if I'm investing the time anymore, I want it
yeah,
to be
I
really
hear you.
solid.
I wanna like learn something or be engaged in some way. It's not just about I don't need to just play a game. It needs to be something
Mhm,
I'm into. And like Path of Exile is the story's fine, but really it's the complexity of the design that I
mhm.
find really appealing. How do you build these characters together and how do you make them work? And I play on hardcore, so like you can theory craft all you want, but until you put the machine on the course, on the track, you're not going to know how it's going to run. And if you make a mistake, your character's dead and you got to start over. So um but yeah, I agree. I pretty much only play um narrative based single player games now. I
Yeah,
want to see something interesting.
yeah.
I want it to take me through some kind of interesting story or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that's also just age because you were asking about, and I got two of them that just got home from school. The way my kids play, while they do get attracted to the narrative stuff, I see that based on their age, they're still interested in things that I used to play a lot more as a kid because it's more exploratory. It's
Yeah.
trying out different mechanics or systems, or because this one's got cool art, or because this one does something funny. Like they find stuff online through like Scratch and things that other people put together that they just love, and it's more that experience and the newness of it. Where with us, it's like yeah, I've seen this mechanic before, and I've seen it done better
Yeah.
here, here, and here. It's just we're old and curmudgeony, and so we're more picky.
Yeah,
And it's
there's
also the time
definitely
thing. We have a limit about. I get one good game each year that I have to choose to be able to play through start to finish. Because I mean that's 80 to 120 hours, and then I
oh
can kind
sure.
of pick at some other things, but I can't really do like 2 full games in a year anymore.
Yeah,
So,
I completely agree, and we're running a little bit
I
over, so
know we're
we
out of
start to move
time.
towards wrap. I just want to be mindful of your time, but I agree. I think there's lots of games that I've just seen it before, right?
Yeah,
I don't need to replay it. I do have to be careful because sometimes there are things that like I think I've seen it before, and then it ends up being an unexpected surprise. Like Spec Ops: The Line is a great example of that, which is a game that presents itself as this generic third-person military shooter, but
yeah,
it's doing a lot of stuff underneath the hood that's really interesting. But yeah,
yeah,
ultimately, if it's going to be like I'll be the first to admit I love Last of Us Part 2 if you haven't gathered that. But
yeah.
and it does I think it does some really solid gameplay stuff.
Mhm.
And there's a few things in it gameplay wise that are just like, why did you spend the time to do this? It's amazing. But ultimately, it's not doing anything too crazy new from its
Yeah,
game. I think it's really like it's almost like Apple computers in a way where like a lot of the core function of a Mac computer isn't trying to do something super new, even though I think Apple does push a lot of innovation for the
yeah,
industry, but they just try to like smooth everything out. And I think that's what Naughty Dog tries to do a lot. Is they try to smooth the gameplay experience out so it's real tight,
yeah,
um, even if it's not something new. But I agree that finding those new moments is kind of where I am right now as a person. Like I want to see what
yeah.
those new story elements are. And so if you can't do it with gameplay, then you have to do it, narratively or conceptually. But that's why I talk about The Witness a lot of Jonathan Blow's work. I still think Hideo Kojima is doing like he's one of those people that
Interesting
understands.
stuff.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
understands the medium. It's like when you watch again movies, when you watch certain directors or certain movies, it's like, okay, that's a movie. I get it. But there's some
Mhm.
people like Stanley Kubrick or even Christopher Nolan is a new one. I think Alex Garland's doing some stuff. Denis Villeneuve, like they understand the medium and they're thinking about how can we piece these things together in a way that's constrained by the medium itself of
Yeah,
movies, which have limiting factors. But how can we use those to as a platform to create something interesting? Stanley Kubrick's stuff. I mean, look at 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like, name me a movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey that's come out in the past 20 years.
No.
And I bet the only ones you can come up with are probably going to be Christopher Nolan movies,
Yeah.
Denis Villeneuve movies, or like Alex Garland kind of stuff, you know? Um, I just saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I highly
Mhm.
recommend. That movie's absolutely astounding. So those are the kind of things like I want that from movies. I want those kind of experiences from games. But also, again, we're older, so I think that
Yeah.
the narrative ideas, like I would imagine that the story mechanism that God of War was using of the sort of building a relationship between father and son
Mhm.
probably hits with you different now that you have children
Yeah.
than it would have maybe 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. But I also like just the way that they mix things up in there too. I like it when people like I I'm torn. I like stories that have something that goes in a way I didn't expect. That's why I've liked the new Spider-Mans, because a couple of them fell into places where partway through watching, I'm like, oh, and now we're going to spend all this time in the drama of getting caught and losing. And they did. They just skipped it. Went, hey, let's just go over here. It's like, oh, they jumped the narrative to the interesting part. Wow, that was great. So I
Mhm.
do like that. Or with God of War, where they had a couple of the surprises that they foreshadowed really well, but it was just solid storytelling. But I also like things that are comfort food. So I mean,
Oh,
I'm
sure.
still like when I take in media and stuff, I'll have either things that are unique and new and interesting, or things that are very, very comforting, like slice of life things. Like if we're talking like anime, like K-On! Or Non Non Byori or things like that, where it's comfortable, it's happy, it's my very Winnie the Pooh type media. Where it's just you get sick, you watch Winnie the Pooh. You've seen it 1,000 times, but it's happy. Um,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
and so it's got to hit one of those two camps for me. But if it goes into something that's like a standardized, like, hey, we're following the traditional heroic or hero's journey, and that's it. It only gets me so far anymore, unless they have
Oh,
something
I
to
hear
add
you.
to it.
I tell you what, I do not need to see another chosen one savior of the universe narrative for a long time.
Yeah.
It's getting real old.
But
Um,
occasionally there are some new ones that still do it the same old way, but they have just enough of a twist that it catches me. That it's like,
oh,
oh
totally.
wow, that was good.
Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I
Does
It's
a
on
lot
my
of new,
list.
yeah, does a lot of cool new stuff. And that's a movie I highly recommend if you can seeing in the theater. I think seeing it in the theater really brings about
Yeah.
um but anyway, I know we're running a little
We're
late, so
way
I
over
want to
time, but I don't want it to end. But anyway,
I know.
it's been
Well, I think
great.
we'll have to continue this, bring this back. So, the thing I always like to ask when we wrap up, but is there anything, Henry, anything else you want to let the audience know about? Any way that folks can connect with you, contact you, those kind
Uh,
of things?
yeah, just I'm pretty approachable. You can reach out. Email's usually the easiest, or um,
What's your email?
yeah, email henry@bawdenstudio.com.
Okay.
So you can find it on I don't know,
You'll find
wherever.
us somewhere. Henry
Yeah,
at
you can find me.
bawdenstudio.com. And then
Yeah.
you do
Uh,
have a Twitter, oh, right?
mhm. Yeah, I'm trying again. I have a love-hate relationship with social media, because whenever I
Me too.
dedicate time to that, I lose all my time from my other productivity. But
Yep.
I'm trying to get better about it. But yeah, if you reach out, yeah, Twitter,
I'm
I'm
awful at
trying to
social
get better.
media. I think at some point, like in multivarious, we'll hire like a social media person that I'm just like, just go say this thing, and then they'll go say it because I don't want to check it. I'm not interested in like I've taken Facebook off of like my phone, at least like the icon's not on the I've
Mhm.
reduced my phone to my one screen that has the apps that I use. Everything else is like in folders far away. Because it really is just a waste of time. You don't learn
Yeah.
anything. Half the time now it just makes you angry. Um,
Mhm.
I don't want to get
For
into
me, Facebook has become like I'm trying to put myself out there, so I'm not just hiding anymore.
sure.
But it's also more just anytime I check it, it's more, how are my family and friends do? Everybody's okay. That's interesting. Cool. But I
Yep.
don't do it for long. It's, like 10, 15 minutes in the morning and maybe 5 minutes at night. But even that, I don't want to like get sucked into it.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that is
so
smart.
But
All right,
anyways,
man.
that's how you reach out. So a couple things. GDEX is coming up. So for folks that don't have your tickets yet, do that. Also, I think there's still a couple volunteer slots. It's a great way to connect with people. And summer and autumn registration is open up at Columbus State. So if anybody's thinking about getting into game development, it's a great place to start.
Yeah, you never know. You might have me as a teacher, Henry or I. Awesome. Well, thank you, Henry. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. This was our long extended episode. It was a lot of fun. I don't know what the hell we talked about, but I had a great time.
Yeah, it was good.
As always, we air every Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. You can go to volpecreates.com/Discord if you want to join our Discord channel, or just volpecreates.com. I need to rework that website. That's one of my summer projects. But we're also on twitch.tv/VolpeCreates, which you probably know because you're watching it here. And then I also post my stuff on the YouTube. So this video will be on YouTube. But otherwise, thank you everybody for watching. On behalf of myself, Chris, we got baby over there taking a little sleep. Lucas, how are you?
Good. I'm just here vibing. Thank you everyone for joining.
Awesome. So thank you all, and we will see you next week.
Have a great day.
See ya.